July 11th, 2019 is now in session. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from the June 20th, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any modifications or discussion?
Yes, and the minutes show that Mr. Stanton abstained on the V 1916 and 1917, and he voted nay.
You voted yes. Any others? Okay, with that modification, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion carries. The second order of business is to adopt the resolutions from the June 20th, 2019 public hearing.
So moved.
Can we
Any modifications or discussion?
just go back to the minutes real quick? So the minutes reflect that Mr. Stanton voted against in both instances.
Mike voted against.
Well, the thing you signed with your signature copy says he abstained.
Oh, that's not the minutes. Those, okay. I see. That's something different. Thank you for pointing that out.
So does his correction stand or not?
No, it's a different correction. It's a correction to the cover page of the resolution.
Okay, so we're fine. Did we vote on the adopting the resolutions?
Not yet.
All those in favor of adopting the resolutions?
Say
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. The resolutions are adopted. There's been a first and a
With that
second.
change.
You're totally through.
That's fine.
The board will now conduct the public hearings on today's agenda. The way we work it here is that first the applicant or the applicant's representative will state the reasons for the requested variance and present any material or documentation which is to be considered regarding the proposal. Next, persons wishing to speak in favor of the proposal will be given the opportunity to address the board. Then persons who wish to speak in opposition will be allowed to address the board. Finally, the applicant or the representatives will be given the option to make any closing arguments or comments to the board. Our procedure is that following the public hearings, the board may make a decision on each application heard. The board may also decide to hold this decision until the next public hearing. If the hearing is closed, no additional information will be allowed into the record except for the information that the board may request. The information will be available for public review at the zoning office in City Hall Commons. Staff will now introduce the first application.
Good afternoon. The first hearing and only hearing for today is V 1919. It's a use variance for uses permitted at 960 Salt Springs Road and 139 and 143 Gorland Avenue to construct 15 dwelling units in one community building owned by the Elmcrest Children's Center and the City of Syracuse. Applicants are the Elmcrest Children's Center, the City of Syracuse, and Christopher Community.
Okay, before we start our hearing, I need to say that the city's Code of Ethics requires me to recuse myself from this hearing because Christopher Community is a client of my advertising agency. So what I'm going to do is sit in the audience, and when the case is over, I'll come back and close the meeting. That's it for me. So, Carol, you can chair from here. Catherine needs to say something before we get going.
Thank you. I just wanted to let everybody know that under the BZA rules, because we only have 3 voting members participating in the hearing right now with the recusal and the 2 absent members, there's not a quorum, which means action cannot be taken this afternoon on this case. I would also, because of that, there will be another hearing. It will be held open to the next meeting. And because this has been noticed, your comments will be noted on the record, but I would also, because there are other voting members who are not here today, I would encourage you to come back if you can, even if you're restating the same information so that those members can hear it as well. But it is being recorded as well. But if you cannot, your comments are still being noted on the record today.
Thank you. And would the applicant please come and share some information about this case, please?
Good afternoon. Hello. My name is Joe Gilia, and I'm the Executive Director at Elmcrest Children's Center.
Can we have your address, please?
My address,
Yes, please.
work address,
Sure.
is Elmcrest Children's Center, 960 Salt Springs Road, Syracuse 13224. You're welcome.
What can you tell us about your case?
A lot. I'm here representing our board of directors, and I'd like to provide a little bit of context behind the proposal that we've put forth before you. So a little bit about Elmcrest. Next spring, Elmcrest will be celebrating its 175th anniversary here in Syracuse. We were founded in 1845 as an orphanage. The last 100 years we have spent at 960 Salt Springs Road. Several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when all the information began to come out about people living in poverty in central New York, and particularly the city of Syracuse, our board directed that we take a look at how Elmcrest might be able to use what we do, our expertise in serving children and families and working with that population to help ameliorate those conditions that impact people living in extreme poverty, and high unemployment, low education, and so on. And in particular, we also wanted to make sure that the children of those who are living in extreme poverty have the opportunity to prepare for kindergarten. And we have a preschool right on our campus, and we can provide those services as well. So education, employment, employability, all those services that would promote independence would be provided for these folks. So we began a strategic planning process with our board. We did a lot of investigation of other communities and other services. We focused on a program that's being run out of Boston by an agency that is called, the Crittenden Women's Union is now called Empath, and they work with single mothers around independence and their families. And so we visited them, we talked with them, we talked about perhaps a housing project, and they said if you can control housing, you can do great work, and they get great results. And they're chasing people all over Boston, but they get great results as well. And but we felt that if we could control housing, if we could stabilize housing for the population that we believe we can impact, this would be a good project. So the population that we're looking at are predominantly single heads of household between the ages of 18 and 25 years. Who are living on public assistance. And we are told that in Onondaga County by the DSS that there are 366 of those families that would qualify under those conditions, and that among them are 603 children. So the plan is to create 50 units of housing apartments, and to be able to work with BOM around all those barriers to independence. So 40% of these women have a high school diploma, 60% have something less than that. And so we want to work with MOM around all that stuff. We want to get the kids into preschool and prepare them for kindergarten, and at the same time, over a period of time, create a family that is independent and that will be successful once they leave our program. So that's what it's 50 units of supportive housing, and it's on our campus entirely. And I mean, the alternative really is to do nothing, and I don't think that's a solution that any of us wants. We know what these folks need, and generation after generation of these families are growing up the same way. 100% of those 366 families living on public assistance grew up living on public assistance, and that's got to stop. That intergenerational poverty has got to stop, and we believe that we can do that. Our proposal is designed to stabilize housing, prepare children for kindergarten, wrap individualized and convenient, accessible services around each family, and enable our community to begin to erode the impact of intergenerational poverty. We have the space, we have the expertise, and we have the will to succeed. We just need your permission, and I'll say please. Thank you.
We do have some questions here as a board about this, if you'd be able to answer them, or is there someone else who'd be better able?
There's actually going to be 2 more speakers.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And Joe is going to turn it over to Kelly. Yep.
And if you'd also state your name and address, please.
Sure. I'm Kelly Besaw. I'm representing Christopher Community. We're located at 990 James Street in Syracuse. Just to give you a little bit of background about Christopher Community, we've been developing and managing housing in the city of Syracuse for over 45 years. We currently manage close to 3,000 units in upstate New York. 822 of those units are located in the city of Syracuse. Out of those 822 units, 426 are senior housing, 396 are family housing. I also wanted to say that we take pride in the way we develop our properties. We're held to an extremely high standard of construction by the state of New York and our other funding sources that includes material selections, energy efficiency measures, and the look of the exterior of the building. We're actually held to a much higher standard than private developers. We also do an excellent job of maintaining our properties. I encourage you to drive by any one of them and take a look. In the past 10 years, we've completed over $27 million of renovations on our buildings. Funds were obtained through refinancing, state, federal, and private funding sources, and weatherization programs. The number does not include renovations that were completed from the project's replacement reserve accounts, so it's actually much higher than that. We're constantly seeking out funds to improve the look of our properties. We've partnered with Elmcrest Children's Center to develop this project. It's going to be located directly adjacent to their campus. The project will include 25 two-bedroom and 25 three-bedroom units. The target population is young moms with children. Christopher Community will be the developer and is responsible for securing the project's financing, overseeing the construction, and ultimately managing the day-to-day operations of the project. We will also be the managing member or majority owner of the ownership entity. We've entered into a formal partnership with Elmcrest, who will provide the critical supportive services that families will need in order to be successful. Elmcrest has secured a grant through the Empire State's Supportive Housing Initiative to pay for the services and to assist with rent payments. Elmcrest will be providing the following services: case management. This person will be responsible for working with the families to establish goals and connect them to the appropriate services, with a particular focus on health care, education, employability, parenting skills, and any additional services that are needed. They will also employ an educational liaison who will work with the parents to make sure the educational needs of the children are met, making sure that they have daycare, are enrolled in preschool, and identifying any special services that are needed. Elmcrest currently offers daycare, Head Start, and a comprehensive preschool program right on their campus. All of the children of the housing program will be able to participate in these various programs. Transportation. This is probably one of the keys to the whole thing. Proximity to Centro, and Elmcrest will also have vans to shuttle to and from the services on their campus as needed. Elmcrest has also entered into formal memorandums of understanding with 14 local service providers to offer a variety of additional services. Just to name a few: Onondaga County, Syracuse City School District, Crouse Health, Helio Health, On Point for College, OCC's Jobs Plus, Center State CEO, CNY Works, Arise, Catholic Charities, Syracuse University, Vera House, Legal Aid, and others. I also want to mention that there will be 24-hour, 7-day-a-week security patrolling the site. The goal of the project is to work with families and their children to stabilize their housing situation, provide them with a variety of services and resources, and ultimately break the cycle of poverty. In conclusion, to answer the question of why here, why this location, the proximity to Elmcrest campus is critical to the delivery of services. Some of the key barriers to access to services and employment are transportation, affordable daycare, and general education around the availability of services. By creating an extension of the existing campus, the project's residents will have easy access to the services that they need to be successful. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Jeremy David Heiser, who will walk you through the site and the particulars of the zoning variance application. Thank you.
My name is Jeremy. My last name is David Heiser. I'm the Director of Facilities and Construction for Christopher Community. Our address, as Kelly said, is 990 James Street in Syracuse. And I'm here to talk more about the application itself. So I'll preface this with saying that formally that we're here to request a use variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. We realize that the site is currently zoned residential A1, and we are proposing to construct, and I think this might be a correction to the opening statement, a total of 17 buildings, 16 residential buildings and 1 community building, but it's still 50 units, 50. 25 2-bedroom, 25 3-bedroom units. So this started back in March. We had a pre-development meeting with the city and met with all the city departments. At that juncture, realizing that we would have to come here. Knowing that, we've started a process of community engagement back then. We've been to, I believe, 7 to 9 or either attended or hosted public meetings about the project. We've really tried to outreach as much as we can to the neighborhood. We've issued public notices. I think we've had some great feedback. We've been through 3 different site plan iterations, trying to respond to neighborhood feedback. And what you see here in front of you is the final iteration. So site location, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, all the green area on the map right here is Elmcrest property. The Elmcrest main campus is here. Salt Springs Road runs on the north side of the site. East Genesee Street runs down here. As far as landmarks, Monio School is right here. Again, Elmcrest main campus. Lemoyne College is over this way. H.W. Smith is over here. And this large building up here is Brick School Terrace Apartments. You have Gorland Avenue is one of the side streets. In fact, Gorland is the street in which we're proposing our site entrance. And then Edge Hill Road is a little farther to the west, away from my finger. So this project actually encompasses approximately 8.3, 8.4 acres of Elmcrest main campus. Elmcrest main campus is approximately 40 acres. In addition, we're proposing to purchase 2 vacant city lots at the west end of Gorland, which are shown right here. So this project will be re-subdividing to create a new parcel, as Kelly indicated, a new ownership entity as well. Due to the type of funding that we're going after to be able to build this project, it simply can't be owned by Elmcrest. It has to be sold into a separate ownership entity. So we're here representing that entity as the contractee. With that being said, the site itself now is generally wooded. Most of the site's forested. A portion of the site actually abuts this parcel right here, which is vacant city land as well. It's a ball field that we believe was once associated with the athletic fields for the former Brick School Terrace School, which is now privately managed. So we abut part of that. A portion of this area that we actually Elmcrest controls at this point is...
Excuse me, when I was there the other day, now it's like a steep hill. Where's the hill under?
So when you say it's a steep hill,
Looking towards your look from Gorland, looking towards your campus, it's like a big drop.
From Gorland looking towards the campus, there's a few houses down here.
Yeah.
The very end of Gorland, yes, this is actually more canyon, frankly, off the end of Gorland. We can post some pictures. But these 2 vacant city lots are very steep. There's approximately 2,500 feet of height change across the lots themselves. Portions of this site that we're proposing to use that are controlled by Elmcrest are not flat, but they're plateau. So coming off this area, off the back of Elmcrest.
So they would be filled. They would be filled in. Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
In essence, the scheme for this project would be to take portions of the site from the west and push them all over to the east. At this point, we feel that we have a relatively balanced earthwork site. So the site plan itself, which I believe you guys all have received as part of the application, again, we've zoomed this in a little farther, so this is Elmcrest's main campus. In fact, this is the auditorium in which we hosted a number of public meetings. We're proposing a direct connection to back of Elmcrest campus as a secondary means of egress, and also to provide shuttle traffic to and from the campus. Our main resident vehicular entrance, we are proposing off Gorland Avenue. Earlier in this project, we were coming straight off the end of the road into the site. We're now proposing a more residential driveway feel to an entrance off the end of the street to kind of stay within the neighborhood character. As I stated, one community building, that's this building right here, that would be staffed by Elmcrest staff, it would be staffed by Christopher Community's property manager, it would be staffed by our on-site community superintendent. Additionally, there's 16 residential buildings spread throughout the site that vary between 3 and 4 units per building, 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units. We anticipate, as I stated, a single-parent population, predominantly women. We anticipate that roughly, based on data that Elmcrest has retrieved, as well as us from our other projects, feel that we'll only see about a 50% park out, so we anticipate 50% or so of our residents owning a car, predominantly using public transportation, which would be access off Salt Springs Road via sidewalks through the site and upward. With that in mind, we're still proposing approximately 50 parking stalls in here. We initially came into this project proposing more, and we're encouraged by city planning and city transportation to consider a reduction if we didn't think we actually need it. So we're still showing 1 per unit, with the anticipation that we'll have 50% users of our units owning a car, but also having a few parking stalls available for our employees that would be specific to this site. We are proposing a gated entry off Orland, predominantly so that we can control access to who's entering the site and who's not. And again, we've met with the neighborhood a number of times. We've attempted to keep the project as far away from adjacent neighborhoods as possible. At this point, we're going back to this map. There is a key distinction here. Elmcrest's control extends to this whole green shaded area, including, you'll notice, this red property line right here corresponds to our project sight line on this red line. We're leaving an approximately 75-foot wide strip of undeveloped land that Elmcrest controls between the backyards of the adjacent neighborhood on Edge Hill and our project, in addition to providing some backyard of our project, and I'll show a graphic later that indicates that scenario. And zooming in, we've really tried for a more residential feel to these buildings so that it feels less like an apartment complex and more like houses. We've considered the sizes of the adjacent housing and tried to consider a more residential aesthetic for the homes we're proposing within the neighborhood. So touching on the 4 key aspects of any use variance request, we feel that as the owner, we would not be able to, the ownership entity of the new property would not be able to realize a reasonable return on any investment at this point, predominantly due to the construction cost. And this, we feel applies to any of the permitted uses. In reviewing the zoning for this district, we felt that residential A, single-family residential, was obviously the preferred use for the site, and we've taken the liberty to develop a proposed subdivision plan for the same parcel that we're proposing to develop. This discounts the fact, this graphic, that you could theoretically, on the 2 vacant city lots right here, construct a single-family house on each one. We've shown 32 in the project site, which conform with the zoning for a residential A1 district. Assuming that single-family home ownership was a goal of Elmcrest's, and I believe if you review their mission, that does not really comply with it. Assuming that's the case, let's assume for a second that we could build 34 homes, single-family homes in this neighborhood. They would be approximately 8,000 square foot lots, which is in context with kind of an average of Gorland and also Edge Hill to the west. figuring a 2,000 to 2,500 square foot home being constructed, and the fact that we have obtained an estimate from a contractor for nearly $3 million in site and utility work alone for this site, if we divide all that out over the cost of single-family housing, we would be looking at 34 single-family houses that would be, in order for a developer such as us to make any money on them, have to be constructed and sold for a cost of between $315,000 and $400,000. Considering adjacent property values available publicly, I find that market to be a difficult one for this area to achieve. I believe the last residential development in the city of this scale would have been Xavier Woods, and if any of you are familiar with Xavier Woods, I believe at this point there might be 6 or 7 homes constructed of the 34 lots, 3.5 to 4 years after it was initially started. The second item I wanted to touch on was the fact that, in our opinion, this is unique and an uncommon circumstance in a number of ways. One, Elmcrest in itself has a unique mission in Onondaga County, especially in this area in the city of Syracuse. Their goal to try to end the cycle of poverty before kids even get there, I don't believe anyone else has that goal at this point unless I'm unaware. I believe in this case the fact that we're providing affordable rental housing directly adjacent to the services and incorporated with the services that will be provided by our partner is a unique scenario. I simply cannot think of another one that's similar. Additionally, the site itself has a number of unique and uncommon circumstances. While I admit that the steep slopes throughout the city of Syracuse do exist, especially on drumlins, I think in this case there are some extremely steep slopes. Much of the site approaches 2-on-1, which is a 25% slope or 45 degrees. There are portions of the site that certainly have drainage issues. We're well aware of that, and our site design at this point considers that. For instance, we have situated our access road up here on a large gully because situating homes on structural fill is not an advisable design scenario, whereas situating a road or an access loop on it is a more desirable situation because you can control the fill that's going underneath it. So those are two of the reasons why we feel this is a unique and uncommon circumstance. The third item I want to talk about is that, in our opinion, this will not substantially alter the essential character of the neighborhood for a number of reasons. One, there's a number of uses adjacent to the site that, despite the fact that this area of Elmcrest, for instance, is zoned residential A1, I think if you were to visit Elmcrest's website, if you were to visit Elmcrest itself, you would quickly realize that Elmcrest is not using the site as though it's a single-family residential subdivision or anything even really resembling what is a permitted use. You have Brick School Terrace Apartments due north of the site, which at the moment is a 58-unit, I believe, senior housing complex. To the west, you have 2 other apartment complexes which are multifamily that I believe to be a student-themed housing of some sort. You have Geronio School down here. So I think in reality, this is not solely a single-family residential neighborhood. This is really a mixed-use neighborhood that probably has, at this juncture, some older zoning. And I'll point out that I believe the zoning ordinance in Syracuse came into effect in 1922, and knowing that the zoning director is here, I might get corrected. But Elmcrest has owned this property since 1918. So I would argue that the zoning kind of happened after Elmcrest moved there. And then the other key reason why I don't feel this will alter the essential character, going back to our original study, we proposed 50 multifamily units, assuming we would probably have on the order of 25 to, let's say, 30 drivers. If this were to be developed as single-family housing, or frankly any of the other permitted uses, I believe in single-family housing scenario, you would actually have something more like a 1.5 cars per household ratio, pushing you closer to 50 or 51 vehicles regularly trafficking Gorland Avenue. I believe that that's actually a larger altering of the essential character of traffic for the neighborhood than our proposed use would be. Additionally, solely based on the fact that the project is directly connected to Elmcrest and would be served by programming on Elmcrest campus, things like shuttles, things like other services being provided in the community building would all be directly accessed via the road behind Elmcrest. That would take that traffic off the city and public streets. And the third key component that I want to touch on is that in this scenario, a single-family housing development, this project here from Gorland into the site would frankly become a city street, putting additional stress on city services, things like trash, things like lawn and leaf pickup. All those different city services would now be associated with a public street. In our proposed use, we are proposing a completely private road from Gorland all the way out to the Elmcrest campus. So this would all be trashed by the project. This would all be plowing and snow removal by the project. There would be no stress on city services by a function of the fact that this would be a private road. And then additionally, we will likely need to make some improvements to Gorland Avenue itself, which I'm not sure that a single-family housing or frankly any other permitted use would do, solely because we're going to have to actually extend our water line connection to access city water. We understand as far as Salt Springs Road, because the water main along Gorland Avenue is deteriorated. It's over 100 years old. So we're planning on and including in our budget having to reconstruct a large majority of that water main, which will also force us to have to rebuild some of the missing and or deteriorated sidewalks that run along Gorland as well. And the fourth item is that we need to at least talk about is the fact that we have not self-created this hardship. I believe going back historically, one tenet there would be the fact that Elmcrest purchased this property and began to use this property initially, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, as a foster home? Orphanage in the early 1900s, prior to the fact that there was any zoning in the city of Syracuse. I'm not familiar with the zoning that far back, others here may be, but I believe firmly that Elmcrest's mission has stayed pretty much the same. It's slightly expanded from its original goal, I think, into trying to capture some of these issues prior to the fact, prior to when they actually became a treatable issue. So it is my position that because zoning was in place after the fact that Elmcrest started to use this property, that it is not a self-created issue. Further, in order for this type of housing to be developed, and this type of housing that we are proposing can leverage federal and state grants and city home funds as well, we feel that that allows us a unique scenario to be able to improve things like Gorland, to be able to access utilities, and to be able to do the significant site work that's required on this project site. And then with that, I think the last statement I'll close with is, in order to try to work with the community and to work with neighbors, we've also put together a drawing that attempts to show how we've tried to mitigate the impact of our project to the adjacent neighborhood, especially Edge Hill. So this drawing right here actually depicts the situation at two houses on Edge Hill, the two houses that are closest to the back of our development. For reference, it would be these two homes along Edge Hill, because they are the closest to our further westerlymost building. And in that situation, as I noted earlier, we've provided this Elmcrest property in this area is fully wooded. It's a mixture of hardwood, softwood, and scrub brush. On this drawing, this section up here, you can see we're proposing to do nothing with that area. Extending another, depending upon where you are, 15 to 20 feet into the site is more untouched woods before you get to our site, which aligns with our site. We're proposing a large fence, 6 to 7 foot high fence, plus a very 10 foot or larger privacy planting at the top of this hill, and then a roughly 8 foot drop down to our site. So our homes will be constructed at an elevation that's quite similar to or below most of the homes along Edge Hill where we impact the site. Meaning that if you're residing in or on Edge Hill, the opportunity for you to catch a glimpse of this project site Might be there in the wintertime when vegetation drops, but frankly, between the over 100 feet of separation we've provided, in fact, it's about a 150-foot setback from the edge of our home, backyards of Edge Hill, not even counting any Edge Hill backyards. We feel that we've tried to go above and beyond to mitigate the impact of the neighborhood. So with that, I'll close with thanking you for your time and opening it up for any questions. We may move around depending on what the question is.
Thank you. You've given us a lot to think about here, so I'm sure we have lots of questions. I'm going to start off with a question. You had mentioned that you had held these public meetings and that as a result of the feedback received at those meetings that you had altered your plan over time. What was the overall sentiment at some of those meetings?
I would say that at the early meetings, starting in March, we attended a TNT meeting on March 12th, the East Side TNT. We hosted a subsequent public meeting on March 20th at Elmcrest. At those two meetings, we actually received little to no true feedback from anyone. So we continued with our site plan and our plans as it was. We did find out within a week or so of that March 20th meeting that there was potentially some concern being raised by residents along Edge Hill. I think, frankly, that they weren't familiar with or understood how to communicate that. So we had a long phone discussion with and started to meet with a small group of Edge Hill residents subsequent to that. Our initial site plans, I apologize I didn't bring those, but our initial site plans showed using portions of this vacant city land up here, as well as this part of the site. As a result of the use of that vacant city land, we would have been closer to the Edge Hill folks, closer to 40 to 50 feet away as opposed to where we are now. Based on feedback we received, we began to remove this portion of the site from the project plans and retracted down to here, which at the end of the day was a little bit more expensive proposition for the project due to the earthwork required, but something we felt we could do and we felt would potentially help us to avoid future issues with the neighbors. We've also started to draw this project farther to the east, away from them. And at this point, we've just simply gotten to the point where we can't fit the project unless we keep it about where it is. So the early phase project plans, if the board needs them, I'm happy to share them, but they are part of all these meetings. After that, we continued into another meeting in early May with the same small group, received feedback, received comments. We did start to receive some feedback and comments as well at that juncture about our residents and what people could expect. I think that there might be still some misinformation, some misunderstanding about what we're building and who it's for, as opposed to maybe what people think it is. We've hosted another public meeting in the middle of May. We have, in all cases, reached out to initially a quarter-mile radius of the project site, as well as other key organizations such as Bethany Church. We've also continued to send notices for every meeting we've hosted to the neighborhoods. On May 13th, we had another meeting. Common Councilor Driscoll did attend that meeting, as well as, I believe, somebody from Neighborhood and Business Development. Subsequent to that meeting, after we started to understand the resistance to developing the former city ball field, we actually had a small group meeting with Brick School Terrace, which is frankly what made our decision to retract from developing that ball field. By late May, we were reviewing all these changes with various city departments to be sure the changes we were making to address resident concerns would still fly with city departments, and in our opinion, we felt they would. So we hosted another public meeting. I'm sorry, back up. We had a small group meeting again with a small committee of Edge Hill. Because the project has been creeping closer to Joanio School, I met with Joanio School's director at the beginning of June just to review what we're doing so they understood what's happening. And as far as I'm concerned, I have received no negative feedback from Joanio. I felt at my juncture with the small group meeting in early June, walked away from the meeting with the Edge Hill folks feeling that we were in a good place. But then by, I think it was July 1st, we received feedback from the residents, and we were able to come to a conclusion that we could move forward with the project. So Early July, we were scheduled to have another public meeting, which we had 3 nights ago, Monday night, and received some, I would say, negative feedback, predominantly focused on, I would say, the programming being offered and our ability to administer the social programming with our proposed residents. And now I'm back up to July 11th, so I have 3 pages of meeting notes. Is that?
That did answer my question. And then I had another question about, you mentioned the fact that you were going to have a water main reconstructed.
Well, we
and
would
all
actually...
the sidewalk work.
We would actually have to reconstruct that, is our understanding, as part of the project. So at this juncture of a project like this, we're still getting some feedback from places like City Water, City Sewer. There's been a lot of back and forth with City Sewer, for instance, about whether we'd connect on Gorland or whether we'd connect on East Genesee Street. We are connecting on East Genesee Street. We're confident in that because we know that. It's just a matter of where in East Genesee Street. So we know that we are. We know that it's our nickel to make that connection. It's our dime to make that connection. We do know that we have 2 options for water. And when I say water, I mean public water. One option is to go out to Salt Springs Road. At this juncture, we've been warned by City Water that we may have to reconstruct the main on all of Gorland because of its age, which we've budgeted for. The other option is for us to go down to East Genesee Street, but in the interest of trying to maintain as much wooded buffer along East Genesee Street, we would prefer to go up Gorland. Plus, it's an added bonus because by reconstructing some sidewalks in Gorland, I feel that our residents will realize the value in getting out to the bus along Salt Springs.
I guess part of my question is, or my concern is, will there be any kind of negative impact to the surrounding neighborhood, having 50 more units,
as far as capacity and things like that?
Capacity and
so,
that with water and sewage.
So what I'm told by City Water is that there's plenty of capacity on Salt Springs. However, there's a capacity issue on Gorland focused on the fact that the water main is very old and in very poor condition.
So once it's upgraded?
That's correct. I think there'll actually be a net improvement to Gorland. I can't speak to Edge Hill. I don't know all the inner workings of that, and quite frankly, we're not accessing Edge Hill's water, so I just simply don't know the answer. I think in some ways this should be a positive impact to Gorland and the residents. And as I said, too, we feel at this juncture that our site and our earthwork is actually roughly a balanced site, which means that the only thing we'll be trucking in will be building materials and likely some run-across or roadway base to put underneath our paved areas. So I feel that the trucking will not include significant amounts of haul away or significant earthwork haul away.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I actually have a couple. One, you guys are under contract to buy those 2 city lots, right?
I believe there's a contract, yes.
Do you have that contract?
I know that I believe that a letter was provided with the zoning variance, Heather?
So I have a copy of the letter here. It's not a contract, but I'll pass this out. Apologize, it should have been on the agenda, but this is permission for Christopher Community to apply for the variance and knowledge of the project. Also, there's one from the executive director of Elm Crest, so they're stapled together.
So still theoretically, even if we approve this, the city isn't under any obligation to sell you this.
That is correct. Yep, legally that is correct. And we do have an option in which we could develop this project as shown here without that lot. It would, in my opinion, create an undesirable driveway condition coming off the end of Gorland. Does that make sense? But as I understand the process from the city, I'm going to speak, and hopefully I'm not incorrect, but I believe that we cannot formally enter a contract until a vote comes to enter the contract, but the contract can't be started until our intentions for the site are known, and we really can't make our intentions formally known until we obtain a variance. I think it's a circle that we simply can't step off of.
So if you read the letter from Commissioner of Assessment, I think he outlines that pretty clearly. And this, just
Also,
in...
it says until an appraisal has been completed. So we have an appraisal problem, because obviously the city can't just give away their property. An approval of the sale has been voted on by the Common Council. So we have those two hurdles. This isn't specifically contingent upon this board acting, though. Meaning the city could enter into a purchase contract contingent upon you receiving your approvals, and then if you don't get them or something happens.
That is not what I'd understood, but if that's the case, then I would want to know that. I don't.
Did you get a copy of this letter from Commissioner Clifford? Oh.
Yes. So I believe here they indicate that they would make a determination once the use variance request for the proposed development result is known. That's how I'm interpreting that.
I might also just add with that, often with use variance applications, it's recommended that the use variance be applied for before the transaction.
Oh,
because
right,
of
right.
the
But that's not before you enter contract stage. So I can contract to
Yes.
buy or sell property, but then I show up as the potential buyer to say, hey, look, this is what I need. So yes, I agree with you entirely that.
I think that's a contract we're more than willing to enter if the city is. I guess I'll leave. Am I right, Kelly?
Yes.
Okay.
This was just the direction that we were given, so we apologize.
The little, I couldn't tell you how wide that is, but what comes all the way down to Genesee down there?
Like a handle thing.
Yeah, the like.
Utility
Yep.
corridor, sewer connection.
Sewer connection. Okay.
Correct.
And that was on the opposite side of the plans that we have here.
Yeah, I'm realizing now that we just presented this, that when we submitted these plans a month ago to the zoning board, that tail was over here, because at the time, city sewer was telling us to connect down here. We've since moved it up to here because city sewer is telling us to connect here.
So we would need to have that
Sure.
as part of our record here.
Sure, absolutely.
So Jeremy, is that... Well, let me say this and then ask this question. So this board is just considering if the use, if the applicant can be relieved of the uses that are permitted to do something that's not permitted. There will have to be other reviews through the Planning Commission with respect to a re-subdivision, because they're carving out a small piece of the 960 and then adding the Gorland Avenue pieces into that. In addition, a project site review will have to be pursued. So at that time, you will get more answers to your questions about the water, the sewer, the utilities, the traffic, the very specifics of the buildings. So, having said that, my question is, that piece is actually part of the parcel, so that still should be shown on there, but what you're indicating, I can't see from here, is just the utility easement?
Well, yes, so in essence, it would be constructed, and then frankly, we would not need to continue to have that. It would just be a utility easement. That is correct.
Right, but there is a small strip that goes down to East Genesee Street. That's part of the actual parcel. So not to be confused with an easement. That, just wanted to make that clear.
Are you referring to the parcel that's all the way kind of on the left here? That 75 very long?
That 75, yeah, that 75-foot parcel was not part of that plan that Heather has in front of her or this plan. In either case, that 75-foot parcel is not part of this development, and there is no easement shown on that parcel.
Is there a reason that we have to have that sewage easement from the, well, it's not even an easement now because it's part of the parcel, from Genesee up to the development area be part of this as a whole? Couldn't we just grant an easement? It's going to be a separate entity.
You certainly could, that's correct. Yep. If you prefer I revise it to show that and submit it next week or later this week, I'm happy to. It's fine. There is no reason why it needs to show as part of the property. That is correct. Elmcrest owns this down here. We'll
Right.
continue to own what remains, be the best way for me to put it.
You also mentioned that that this new development will be separate from Elmcrest. It'll be separate. It's not going to be Christopher Communities. It's going to be a separate entity. What type of an entity is this? In other words, is this strictly, are these units strictly deemed to be like a part of a program, or are they more along the lines of just
I'll let Kelly take
residential?
this one.
Sorry. It's very hard to hear you guys from back here. I apologize. I got part of it, so the...
Can you come up to the
Why don't you
microphone?
come up here, Kelly?
Sorry, sure. I thought I could hear
You could actually use that mic there. I think that one's on.
So I'll take that one. The ownership structure is actually going to be a limited partnership. We intend to apply for federal low-income housing tax credits, and there will be an investor, so they're going to require that. Christopher Community, however, will be the managing member of that partnership. So we technically own it, but there's like that shelter in between. Does that answer the question?
It does.
Okay,
Thank you.
perfect. No problem.
Any other questions?
Actually, yes. So you mentioned that you had contacted a residential developer to see what this would cost if they were to put up single-family homes, and you got a rough estimate of about three.
We contacted the contractor.
Contractor.
Correct.
One?
We used one, that's correct. We also used some industry standards for development, such as RS means, to do some estimating of our own as well.
That's all I have now.
Don't think we have any other questions. At this point, we will ask if there's anyone who'd like to speak in favor of this proposal. If so, we would ask that you come up single file, state your name and address. When you do, come up to the microphone. Either one.
My name is Michael Gilman. Excuse me. I live at 136 Edge Hill. I've owned my home for a little over a year now. I'd like to state my support for this project, stating some facts. I've worked as a landlord for over 30 years, managing over 500 units before I decided to retire. I was here in the city here. After that, I started a landlord group that evolved to a community agency, which I ran for 10 years. In that agency, we provided all types of service to welfare, re-entry folks, non-custodial parents, as well as anyone who walked in the door. We provided a foundational training in basic skills, as well as work-related skills, such as automotive, construction, office-type trades, and retail skills. Our task was to help these folks get and keep a job. This was a tough population to work with. None of them had a substantial foundational network to support them. Things as simple as knowing how to manage their money properly, or even having a mattress to sleep on instead of a pile of clothes and trash bags. Not to mention the difficulties of getting one of usually many children to some type of daycare. Think 5 below zero, pushing a carriage and holding on to a couple of children in tow, to a bus stop to get to 2 different daycare facilities and then off to work. Not so easy. SU did a study for me when I had the nonprofit back in mid-90s, 98 or so, that showed the average tenant in the main Syracuse zip codes moved every 7 months. Not very good to keep a neighborhood stabilized. Syracuse today is known as one of the most poverty-stricken cities in America. We have more lead paint poisoning cases than most small cities. I've worked with both Elmcrest and Christopher Communities over the years and know them to be outstanding organizations that serve our community well. If not for the likes of those 2 organizations, our situation with poverty and poorly educated children would be worse than it is today. Supporting this project means that 50 families that currently do not have access to good, healthy housing, education, the proper supports to obtain a good education and a good job will have this critical access. You might be swayed by folks here today stating that scattered housing is better. I can tell you that the barriers to success with scattered housing is simply the services are too far away. Transportation is a problem for this segment of community. Having the daycare, school, training right on the site where folks can be guided to making decisions that are good for their family are key. Learning how to build a solid foundational network of opportunity is the answer, because with this project, this is now how and where you live. It is the key to removing 2 generations at a time out of poverty. Some people here today will talk about the fear, what happens in 5 years if the grant is not renewed. This population of folks has always had and always will have service grants available. This project fits nicely into the current initiatives of bringing folks out of poverty by providing the environment and skills and tools necessary. This project has the tools to make it successful simply because the participant lives within the program. It is time to stop the not in my backyard feelings, come together as a community to support our community with our good neighbors that have always been supporting to our most hard to serve. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in favor?
I would as well. My name is Dr. Joyce Garber, and I ran an inpatient psychiatric unit at Upstate for about 8 years. And what was similar to this population...
Oh, I'm sorry, could you state your address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I live at 159 Edge Hill. I'm on the east side, and I'm directly at the corner of this project. So I am...
Spell your last name.
It's Garber, G-A-R-B-E-R. Joyce is my first name.
Thank you.
Okay. And in my work with a very, very difficult patient population, I also use the same criteria that this group is using, and that's what impressed me, because we had limited bed capacity, and we had some very, very sick people who needed extensive multidisciplinary services, and I was the gatekeeper. And I was extremely impressed that they wanted to serve the people who had the most dependents in their family, needing them to come back in better condition. If I had one bed, it would go to the mother or father of 5 children and not to the solitary individual who had no children. So they were using a criteria that I very well recognized. And I was impressed that they would be assessing people's motivation. Because of their children, they would be motivated to go back to their family life, improving their family's condition, because I saw that all the time. Now, we had great successes, we had great failures, and you have to be aware of what is likely to work and what isn't. And I think people who are connected to their family unit and want to do the best for their children and hopefully their spouse or significant other are more likely to succeed. And we had massive services. We had social services, psychological services, psychiatric. I ran group every day. We had a group meeting for the whole unit every day. And it's just, you need a massive service provider to really move people from this kind of situation. Now, they're talking about poverty. We had extreme mental health problems, and they're kind of similar because the two go together. And I didn't care how sick anybody was, and I didn't care what their diagnosis was. That was our job. We could deal with that. What I wanted were motivated people who would work the program, and it was going to be hard. We had people in the hospital for as much as 18 months, and we wound up dealing with their whole families over time, because we had family services as well. And, you know, I would like to speak for the project. These people really need help. Their children need help. And you can get some very good successes. You also have to be aware there are people who you can't help because they're too destructive to the other patients or clients in the community. And hopefully they'll be looking for that. Because if you have somebody who is just too controlling of other people, too manipulative of other people, just too antisocial, psychopathic, you really have to show them the door in order to preserve the milieu for the people who can benefit. And I think they have the services that can do that. So I would like to speak for the service. And my husband as well is on board for the services.
Thank you very much.
Just very quickly, I'd just like to make a quick comment that everybody can certainly say First Amendment right to say anything that you want at, essentially anything that you want at this hearing, but I just wanted to just remind the board and the audience that the variance itself is for the number of dwelling units, and the board cannot discriminate against the people who will occupy those houses, whether it be based on disability or any determinant like that. It's really about the number of dwelling units. So just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think that's important to keep in mind. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in favor of this project?
My name is Patricia Deacon. I live at 403 Crawford Ave, 13224. For many years, I worked with young parents who were public assistance recipients. The array of challenges they confront can be extremely daunting, with unstable housing at the top of that list. One of the most critically important elements for families, and especially children, is to feel secure and safe, as well as knowing that their home is stable. This proposal to create an innovative residential environment that can address housing vulnerability and incorporate wraparound services is a major and visionary undertaking. The proposed site is located in a discrete and at the same time convenient location with linkages to programming at the Elmcrest campus as well as to other agencies, programs, and education and employment. I thank you for your support for this proposal.
Thank you. I believe I saw another hand at the back.
Hi, thank you for your time, everybody, today. My name is Yvonne Smith. I'm a faculty member in the School of Social Work at Syracuse University. I have entered into
I'm sorry, can we have your address as well,
Oh,
please?
I'm so sorry. 244 Whitehall, Syracuse University. I've entered into a preliminary memorandum of understanding with Elmcrest to conduct research on the implementation and outcomes of this program if it is able to go forward. If you don't mind, I'm going to read so I can be as brief as possible. I've had the opportunity to conduct research in partnership with Elmcrest in the past. I wanted to share a few words about why I believe this project is innovative and a wisely designed intervention to help break the cycle of intergenerational poverty in Syracuse. As you know, the poverty rate among young solo parents and their kids is high, as is the rate of homelessness, housing instability, unemployment, and poor health outcomes for young children. Reports from Onondaga County suggest that the average solo parent family moves more than twice a year, disrupting community support networks, access to employment, and school connections. Young single parents and their children in Syracuse are a highly vulnerable group for whom very few specialized services are now available. The proposed project has been carefully designed to serve these families in a safe, supervised, healthy housing community where children have easy access to early childhood education and other supportive services, and their parents have the housing stability and supportive services they need to become self-sufficient. Locating the housing units on the Elmcrest campus is an essential feature of the plan because it makes these services, as well as public transportation, recreational spaces, and 2 universities easily accessible. Supporting young families through specialized supportive housing is a wise strategy for reducing poverty in Syracuse because it both addresses homelessness and poverty among parents and positions their children for healthy development. We know from a robust body of research on adverse childhood experiences that kids who grow up in poverty are at greater risk of a range of negative health and social consequences in adulthood. The Elmcrest project is designed to intervene in this intergenerational transmission of poor outcomes. To my knowledge, very few programs in the U.S. serve this important population. And as such, through ongoing evaluation efforts, the Elmcrest project is poised to become a model for other cities. Finally, I want to speak to the potential impact to the neighborhood of locating the project on the Elmcrest campus. It's been my observation over the past several years that the Elmcrest campus is an aesthetic asset to the community. Its buildings and landscapes are well cared for, home-like, and in keeping with the architectural styles of the neighborhood. Indeed, the campus is so unobtrusive that I have encountered many longtime Syracuse residents who were surprised to learn where it was located. I believe the high quality and careful design of the proposed units will also fit unobtrusively in the context of the surrounding neighborhoods. I also believe from my many interactions with Elmcrest management and staff that safety, security, and aesthetics for program participants and the surrounding neighbors will be carefully maintained. finally, as a former social worker who served as at-risk adolescents and young adults, I want to speak to the strengths of the population that the Family Housing Project seeks to serve. I know that we cannot discriminate against the folks that this housing is designed for, but I think in reality and historically, we know that not in my backyard kinds of movements by citizens have done that. There are many unjustified negative stereotypes attributed to young single parents. Many Americans have blamed young mothers especially for their own poverty, vilifying them with false stereotypes of the lazy, quote, welfare queen. It has been my experience that the struggles of young parents and their kids are best understood as complex interactions of social inequalities like structural racism, segregation, and unequal access to quality education, rather than as simple personal failings. These are young people who are working hard under very difficult circumstances to stay housed, educate themselves and their kids, maintain employment, and manage their own physical and mental health. These are young people that our community ought to be rooting for, not fearing. With the support of the zoning board, I believe Elmcrest Family Housing can offer a path to health, education, and independence for these families. Thanks.
Dr. Smith, did you say that you have a working relationship with Elmcrest?
I have partnered with Elmcrest Children's Center on previous research, and we have a memorandum of understanding that we would work together on future research on this project if it were to go forward.
Okay, based on that, what I would recommend is that your comments be considered as part of Elmcrest's presentation. It will still be considered on the record in full, but rather than putting you as a community member, we'll put your comments with.
Sure.
I would recommend that the board do that because of the professional relationship.
Sure. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wanted to speak in favor of this project? Hearing none. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in opposition to this project? Okay, if you'll kind of line up behind the microphone here. I just want to have an idea of how many people will be speaking. And if you can lead with your name and your address, please.
My name is Sam Basile, B-A-S-I-L-E. I live at 174 Edge Hill Road. To the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, greetings. My name is Sam Basile, and I am a resident of 174 Edge Hill Road. I have lived there for over 30 years and have lived in the general neighborhood since I moved to Syracuse in 1973. I have major concerns with and oppose the building of the project outlined in application V-1919. I believe the construction of a gated, segregated, high-density housing conflicts with the essential character of the neighborhood, which is single and double-family detached residences. I contest the standards of proof as put forward by Christopher Community. Christopher Community claims it is incapable of earning a reasonable return. This assertion should be made by Elmcrest, the current owner of the parcel. The variance application requires a copy of contract to purchase, which is missing. Elmcrest provided a unilateral promise to sell, which is not binding on Christopher Community. Both parties use terms such as partnering and teaming, which have no legal definition. Number two, Christopher Community describes issues with city-owned parcels, which they have no owner's interest. Number three, Christopher Community asserts that the permitted uses would be not compatible with the Elmcrest mission. I failed to find on the Elmcrest website any reference to building high-density housing. I do find, however, plenty of references to teaching children, a function that is allowed under the zoning regulations. 4, Christopher Community provides reasons for not building single-family dwellings on Elmcrest property. One would think the same reasons would be applicable to multifamily housing. Nowhere in this section are dollars and cents mentioned. I would expect at least a profit and loss statement comparing the current Elmcrest finances to any projected ones. The reason for showing dollars and cents is to prove to the board that Elmcrest would incur substantial operating losses or loss of future income. Christopher Community claims the property is unique or uncommon. Syracuse is full of single-family and apartment houses built on the same topology as the Elmcrest property. One needs only to tour Strathmore or Bradford Hills to see how common the Elmcrest property actually is. 2, Christopher Community claims that only a nonprofit has access to certain funding sources, which, on its face, is nonsense. Christopher Community claims the project will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The neighborhood surrounding Elmcrest is single and two-family homes. There are only 2 high-density housing sites in the neighborhood of Elmcrest, Blossom Road and the Brick School Apartments. Blossom Road is a collection of about a dozen apartment houses from the 1960s. Since then, no one has sought to construct anymore. Brick School Apartments is a former school building and fits nicely into the neighborhood. The addition of gated, segregated housing disrupts the cohesion and the unity of the neighborhood. Christopher Community claims the hardship is not self-created. What appears to have occurred is some funding was secured by either party and then a project created to fulfill the requirements of said funding. Typically, all the preliminary hurdles are completed prior to the funding being in place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will you take a written copy of this?
I believe we have a copy of that.
I love passing these things on.
Hi, my name is Michael Crinnan, and I live at 141 Edge Hill Road, Crinnin. I've lived there for about 30 years. So initially I was pretty open-minded to this program, and I never thought I'd be one of those not-in-my-backyard people, but I found myself when this proposal was first presented, it literally was going to be in my backyard, a few feet away from my backyard. So, of course, I was alarmed. But initially I tried to be open-minded. I think I'm a pretty liberal guy, blah, blah, blah. And I do appreciate all the work that Christopher Community has done to accommodate neighbors' concerns. Even though I opposed the project, they were very, very responsive and patient and generous with their time and their concerns. So thank you. Now, I didn't feel that way about Elmcrest, unfortunately. I really take issue with, they based this whole program on a scattered site program in the city of Boston. That's what this is, and I 100% believe in scattered site. 42 years ago, I worked for Transitional Living Services. I worked at Kennedy Square Apartments, where mental health patients, clients were scattered throughout Kennedy Square in different apartments. There was a staff apartment. And so they were integrated into Kennedy Square. So the people next door, they didn't know there was a big cluster of people with mental health issues. So I think it's the way to go, and I think it's really interesting that they based their program on a program that's totally different and one that I believe in. So I take issue with that. Unfortunately, at the public meetings, whereas Christopher Community I thought was very solicitous, we were always, in my opinion, lectured by the people at Elmcrest as though we didn't give a damn about single parents, which was really difficult, or that we didn't care about poverty in the city of Syracuse. So right away people shut down about, they're not listening. They don't hear our concerns. They just want to preach at us and tell us we're not really receptive to the poverty issues in Syracuse. That's not the case. I was the director of AIDS Community Resources for 27 years, and I, way back when, was the only person in the room that opposed the building of segregated housing for people with HIV. I don't believe in segregated housing. I think it's full of problems. This went through anyways, and there was so many problems with the segregated housing for people with HIV because the only thing they had in common was they had HIV. And everybody brings their issues to the table, their histories. There was lots of problems with domestic violence and drug use and drug selling. I'm just using one example of what I saw, segregated housing. So, and I'm opposed to it because of my experience with transitional living.
If I might interrupt you for just a moment.
I'm sorry.
Is that your main reason for opposing this project, or is there...
That it's segregated, congregate, high density, yes. And I think yes. Do you need, is that?
No, I wanted to make sure. I wasn't sure if you were going to cite some other issues.
I am really, 5 Ps really. I think it's philosophically, programmatically, practically, public safety-wise, and a property owner. Again, I'm all down to five pieces, and some of which Sam has already talked about. But my bottom line is, and I know you're talking about housing, does it fit in, but the reason for the housing, there wouldn't be a zoning, this wouldn't be an issue if if I believed in the reason for the housing, because it's based on a scattered site model, and this is not a scattered site model. So the same goals doesn't equal success. Just because both programs have the same goals, the data doesn't apply, in my opinion.
The execution's different.
Yeah, totally different. Totally different. Big Boston, scattered site. Big city, Syracuse, small city. Clustered site. Not scattered throughout the city. And transitional living, they would go to all the different places. So as far as transportation, they provided means for people to get to the services. So that's another model that I think is, and you're integrated into neighborhoods and people next door, blah, blah, blah. So I don't want to go on more than I have to. I think also programmatically there's no requirements other than the financial, whatever your subsidy is. There's no graduation date. So when you get into this program, there's no you don't have to graduate out of the program. You can stay. And apparently that's because of the money. And I agree with Sam. I think they found the money and then created a program instead of creating a program. And that's my experience anyway. So you get in the program, you're 18 to 25, you don't have to leave. I don't get it. It's like, I go to high school, I go to college, I have to graduate, there's goals. So I don't understand the whole concept. And as a property owner, I do care about what's the impact of a segregated public housing program. That's not, actually they moved it away from my backyard. But I still feel philosophically I should speak because I am opposed to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Frank Durkee. I live at 181 Edge Hill, Syracuse, New York, 13224. I'm also opposed to it, basically because of the sheer size and scope of the project, the amount of people only 100 feet away from the residences on Edge Hill. Also the impact that 2 years of construction is going to have. I've worked on these projects. I've worked on these projects with Christopher community near West Side. And to have 75 to maybe 100 kids 24/7 in that neighborhood, it's just too many. If it was a smaller project like near West Side, scattered housing, I'd be all for that. Totally understand the issues, but the construction impact is going to be a 2-year plan. It's going to be a big toll on the utilities coming up on Salt Springs because it runs down to Genesee. It'll impact our utilities, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Gregory Lambert. I live at 151 Edge Hill Road. I submitted or sent a statement by email last night, and I just wanted to make sure it would be part of the record. I want to make just 2 points in relation to the letter that I sent to you. One is I am opposed to the project, although I do understand and completely support the social good. My problem with this is that it is a high-density concentration in a low-density residential location. Most property owners, including myself, this is my first home that I purchased. We purchased that home. I purchased that home specifically on Edge Hill Road because it bordered, at that time, it bordered public park land as well as forested land that I had no understanding that it would lead to any kind of development in the future. I felt that that kind of location, as well as the fact that Edge Hill Road is cul-de-sac, that it would protect the value of the property from the declining values of property in all of the neighborhoods surrounding it.
Unfortunately, in my letter, I point out that over the last 10 years, and I wasn't aware of this because I was out of the country most of the time, the city has either leased or sold 2 schools on Salt Springs Road to, in one case, Hillside Organization, which is a social service organization, as well as the Brick School Terrace, which was turned into high residential concentration of both retirement as well as some, I believe, Title IX or disability disability residents as well, and I completely supported that when that went in. However, the Catholic Diocese has recently, or over the last several years, also then dedicated or gifted land both to Elmcrest and to the Hillside. So Edge Hill Road is now surrounded by a series of organizations that are dedicated to social services, which I support. However, it changes fundamentally the nature and the character of the neighborhood and of the place. To add this component, or to add this high-density residential, would radically alter the nature, and I don't even think it makes sense to even call it at this point R1 or low-density residential at that point, because the majority of the uses will have been mixed. The only other point that I want to make is I've been very appreciative, and in conversation, I was on the smaller committee with the Edge Hill Road folks, and tried to be balanced in my approach, tried to weigh my responses to this. My biggest problem, and I think this concerns the number of units, is the number of units is dictated or determined by the regulation of the application for funding. So in a sense, it is a bit arbitrary to throw 50 units into a small parcel, because the requirement of 50 units is the basis for the award of the funding. We have come back, many of the residents had come back to them and said, can you reduce the number? And they said no, because then the Christopher community, or the folks that we met with, said no, because we would no longer be eligible for the grants that we've applied for. The other point is that they made, a gentleman made many comments about the traffic as a result of this. There's one exit for public cars or residential cars. Most of the traffic to the Elmcrest campus, which is separate, will be conducted by the Elmcrest staff and by shuttles. But that means that you have upwards of 50 cars trying to exit and enter into this gated community at different portions of the day. Now, they've made statements that many of the residents won't own automobiles, but yet they've allowed in their plan for 50 parking spaces. So my objection is that you have to then respond and plan on 50 cars entering and exiting this residence on one road to Salt Springs Road, which is already encountering problems in terms of traffic that is right at the corner of Sealy and Salt Springs and Gorland Avenue. The final point is that there is right now, and I appreciate that they said that after they would have to add a water main and therefore have to repair and substantially upgrade the water main. All of the water mains in that area are of the same age. And the draw of water, of that amount of water for high residential maintenance, is likely to cause problems for the surrounding area, and that would thoroughly need to be studied by an engineer, and it may involve the city investing in enormous cost in order to upgrade the other water mains in order to not allow the off-run to this development to, in a sense, reduce already what in my house is a very low PSI rate. So I feel that the utility impact will also be something that we don't know right now, but it will have a major impact on the project. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hart. I live at 169 Edge Hill Road. I've been in contact with several of you. Was the ad hoc chair of the small group that met with Elmcrest and Christopher community on several occasions. The site plan that they have present is the fourth iteration, and we have appreciated their taking our comments and our concerns into effect. I'm still in opposition. I'm not in opposition because I'm of the not in my backyard, and I'm not in opposition because of the social programs, and I'm not in opposition because of who would be living there. I'm strictly 100% in opposition because I do not believe that a multi-unit facility should be in the residential area that we live in. I bought my house 4.5 years ago, and the reason that we bought on Edge Hill is because the character and the nature of Edge Hill and of the neighborhood. Edge Hill is a beautiful tree-lined street with beautiful houses, and one of the main reasons we bought there is because of the cul-de-sac, the park, and what I had wrongly assumed was a forever green area. We did not realize that it could be developed. I will actually, if I can show you on the plan, right there. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You want to show them on the large?
1, 2, 3, 4. My house, my backyard, I will be in the epicenter of the development. I just do not believe that a unit facility with 150 to 200 people, regardless of their age, I would be in opposition if this plan changed and it became 32 single-family houses. I would still be in front of the zoning committee as still opposing. I believe that any development of that area for families to put that many people in is profoundly, inherently wrong, and is going to definitely negatively affect not only my quality of life, but the quality of life of Edge Hill and the surrounding areas. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can I just ask you a quick question?
Sure.
If the density of this project were to be reduced, what would you think would be an appropriate level?
We've asked them numerous times to reduce it by half. They've told us that they're unable to reduce it by half because of the funding source, that their funding is fundamentally based on the number of units and the people that they need to have in the program and the grant. So as Sam and Michael have indicated, it wasn't that they came up with a program and then got the funding. They got the funding and had to come up with a program. So the problem is that we've asked them, they have made many changes. They have pushed it back, but the problem is the plan hasn't gotten any smaller, even though that they've shifted it down, so now 6 backyards are affected. It hasn't changed the number of people or the number of units. It's still going to be 17 buildings, 16 residential, 1 main building, and it's still 2 heartbeats per bedroom for 2 bedrooms and 2 heartbeats for 3 bedrooms. So it could be legal between 150 to 250 people. So it hasn't changed, just where the parcel is, because they're no longer going to be using the parcel directly behind our houses or the city project. They'd be taking on those 2 lots on Gorland for their access, but the actual number of buildings hasn't changed. So we would, and I think a lot of the people in the neighborhood would feel much differently of the project if it was significantly smaller. But they have said, again, with the funding, they cannot make it any smaller.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Eddie Bevilacqua, 123 Edge Hill Road, 13224. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I'm going to kind of reiterate, just put on record, I also oppose this mainly from the high density aspect of the proposal. Again, going back to item C in the proposal itself, where it says, does the use variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood? This high-density proposal will change the whole character, at least relative to Edge Hill Road. The other comment in the proposal dealing with a potential building single-family units, 34 of them at roughly 0.2 acre in size. The average lots on Edge Hill are more like a third to a half acre, so that 34 single-family units is not actually equate to what actually currently exists in Edge Hill Road.
I'm sorry, could you spell your last name?
Bevilacqua.
Did you get that?
No, I didn't.
Bevilacqua.
I got it.
Okay.
Evgeny Orlov, E-V-G-E-N-Y.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
E-V-G-E-N-Y, O-R-L-O-V, 126 Edge Hill Road. Members of the board and zoning committee, I'm strongly opposed to the proposed project to build a temporarily subsidized housing next to another assisted housing facility with near 300 senior residents in my community and neighborhood. I've asked myself two simple questions. Will the project address a poverty issue of my town in any meaningful way? And will it make the city better and more attractive place to live? My both answers are no. One, intentions. I strongly believe that people who plan to build that project have good intentions. I also have no doubt that people who wanted to build I-81 through the heart of the city had good intentions as well. Nevertheless, we are where we are. End results, not intentions, matter at the end. Two, the project is not sustainable. The project is only funded for 4 years with publicly funded grant money. No further commitment to the prospective residents is projected beyond that period. I am an ESL student for life without parole, but I understand the difference between the word grant and word guarantee. According to the planners, after this initial subsidized period, if no grant money are allocated, the housing will be converted into market-rate apartment complex for middle-class families. In plain English, if I may, it means that complex will be converted in money-making machine for the prospective landlord once it is built with my and my neighbors' tax dollars. I don't see how this will benefit the low-income mothers and children who may end being displaced when the subsidy is lifted. If the conversation is about providing good, safe housing for mothers and children, then a short-term solution that uses those families to take advantage of tax incentives and public grant dollars, then abandons them in favor of making a profit is certainly not the solution, to say the least. Three, the idea to solve poverty problem with just another flavor of subsidized housing project proved to be not working again and again. It looks like just another attempt to prove Albert Einstein wrong. 4. The project has no set or verifiable goals. There is no clear timeline or end date. As a representative of the community that will be most affected by the noise and mess of prolonged construction project, I demand much more details on developers' long-term plan and environmental impact assessment before a zoning approval even is considered. 5. The project arrangements, low-cost housing, gated community, medical and school services, all good stuff, creates absolutely zero incentives for its tenants to move out. Why do I need a fishing rod if I am given a fish anyway in exchange for attending a non-mandatory classes teaching benefits of fishing? Patrons of the project are going to have absolutely no jurisdictions over tenants' behavior beyond general social norms. If a tenant decides to completely ignore offered educational opportunities, there is absolutely nothing can be done to reverse it. 6. We understand that lead exposure and poisoning is a major issue for many children in our community. However, arguing that we will move the needle on this issue by spending public dollars to help a developer build a small set of lead-free units for the families lucky enough to live in them is just disingenuous. Those public dollars can be much better spent and scaled if directed directly into lead remediation in existing units of housings. The project will entirely change Elmcrest's core mission, delivering a temporary relief to children in need, or even worse, it cannibalizes it altogether. It is a clear conflict of available resources being spread too thin. Edge Hill Road community is a unique and also fragile ecosystem. It survived in spite of all odds for many years, but signs of erosion are already visible. That project will only further dramatically denigrate it. In order to see Edge Hill Road future, one needs to go no further than 150 yards east to Edge Hill Road, to Gorland Avenue. The difference is stunning. 9. Because of the construction and many other unknowns and ifs, the project will affect my property value in negative and unpredictable way. And I have no shame in bringing that issue up as well. Please notice that the property values on Edge Hill Road are already depressed in comparison to similar houses only a few minutes away. I am an immigrant to this country who started his life over at 40. I bought my house on Edge Hill Road with the first money I could scrape together 26 years ago and have raised my children in this community. My house is my safety net. We're all under the dictatorship of age. And when my time comes and I cannot longer climb our stairs, I will be forced to move somewhere else, as have my highly regarded neighbors who lived on our street for 40 years, circled the globe many times, each time coming back to the lovely house on Edge Hill Road. Not to become a burden to my kids and my society is my social responsibility. If the city planners have different plan for me, please let me know. Thank you for your time. And this is my forever.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who'd like to speak in opposition?
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I am Lois Davis-Wilson. My address is 165 Edge Hill Road, Syracuse. I am vehemently against this project. I find it's racist. I find the group of two who are proposing this venture are doing so on the backs of young women who are mothers. I think that is insulting. It is despicable. I attended one public meeting, and the representative from Elmcrest stood and said, "We are moving forward with this project, and we have the city." I was dumbfounded. His arrogance, his assuredness that this dog will hunt. That is not the attitude you have when you invite someone to your establishment to present to them. We were his guest in my world, and we were mistreated and insulted. I am against this project not because of the composite of the residences. I am against this project because I don't want any project behind my house. My husband and I bought there 49 years ago. We have paid our taxes. We have paid our dues. We have seen our area marginalized, as noted earlier about the schools, the brick house. I support that. But enough is enough. I've had enough. I don't want somebody disturbing the woods, peaceful, wonderful, beautiful woods that host fox, raccoons, deer, squirrels. It is heavily wooded. It's not lightly wooded. It's heavily wooded. Why would you go and clear cut that and deposit 50 or how many ever young women with children in a gated, which is wire, actually, it's a fence? Why would you want to build this wall around this population and call it compassion or concern? I care about you. No, no, no. You care about how much money you can make on the backs of this population. So my vote is no, not according to the size. You can reduce it whatever you want. Leave that parcel as it is. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in opposition? Hearing none, we would invite the applicant to come back up and maybe provide some rebuttal to some of the comments that have been made.
Again, Kelly Besaw, 990 James Street. I just wanted to point out we've had several meetings and have sort of done our best to communicate the nature of the project, but I just wanted to clarify a couple points of misinformation. The first being the fence and the gate. I just wanted to point out that those two things were implemented into the project based on comments from the neighbors and their request to reduce cut-throughs and to make sure that the project is secured. We would certainly be happy to remove those because that would reduce the overall cost of the project. We don't want to create a prison, but we're trying to respond to the comments. So that's my first point of clarification. Other than some things, I'll stick to the points that pertain to zoning. I just want to say, for starters, we actually met with the City of Syracuse 2 years ago in another pre-development meeting about this project. The funding that Elmcrest secured at that time wasn't even available, so I just wanted to clarify that this project was not predicated on that funding. This project was predicated on the mission of both organizations, and we partner with all sorts of groups to do this type of housing. But in terms of the density and the Boston model versus the Syracuse model, we had identified 360 plus families that qualified for this project. So for us to build 50 units is just a drop in the bucket of who really needs this type of assistance. The scattered site model may work in Boston, where you can hop on a subway and a public transportation is hopping at every corner. But in Syracuse, I think we have to be realistic and recognize that public transportation is actually going the other way with less stops and less availability, especially 24/7, where we're going to have some people who are working overnight shifts, who need to get their kids to daycare early in the morning. This is going to make it so easy for them to be able to get up, have a shuttle pick up their kids, take them literally right across the campus that's a couple hundred feet away, and they can worry about their day and getting to work and not have to deal with all those other exterior issues that continue to create barriers. So the 50 units was predicated on that. In terms of it being driven by the funding, I think there was a misinterpretation of that as well. We developed it to 50 units because that's what made the operating budget work. We wanted this to be able to afford the private services that we discussed, so it would not be a drain on the city services. We want to be able to maintain the property. We have a very, very plush budget. We're not making any money. We're not for profit. It's structured in a way through the tax credits that we don't get any money from the rent. It all has to go back into the building. So I just want to make that very clear that we don't get any money from the operations of the building. It all has to go into the replacement reserve and back into the actual project. That's why we're both not for profits. Again, the density, that's why we selected the density, and I think the scattered site model for this just isn't going to work for the project. And I know Jeremy probably has a couple other things. I won't get into the population and all of that stuff again, because we're all going to get parking tickets.
I think I just did, actually. I guess a couple quick points I'll make, more of a technical nature. Somebody made a comment that the density was not similar to Edge Hill, and to be frank with you, the density in the proposed residential subdivision that we're showing, as I said in my presentation, is an average of the lot size between Gorland and Edge Hill. And I'll also point out that the project site does not propose to traffic Edge Hill in any manner whatsoever. The project proposes to traffic Gorland Avenue. So these lot sizes represent an average between what you see on Gorland and what you currently have over on Edge Hill. We felt that was the best way to show this density. And I'll also point out that 34 units versus 50 units is not that much of a reach, and to downgrade to 25 units from 34 units is about an equal split. So the other point I would make is numbers of cars. To date, we have not been asked to prepare a traffic study by any city department. Once we get to that juncture, we're more than happy to, but I hope this board understands that it's not typical for us to do that, and we're not going to prepare a traffic study if we don't obtain a use variance. Simply not wasting funds. Those are my comments.
Any other comments from Okay, hearing none. We are going to close this hearing. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll hold this hearing open until our next Board of Zoning Appeals hearing, which will be in about 3 weeks. And we do invite you to come back at that time, where we'll have another hearing, and we'll be able to vote, because hopefully we'll have a quorum at that point in time. If that is the reason why we cannot vote today.
And I'll just confirm the date is Thursday, August 1st, and that'll be at 1 o'clock here. And we will again send out public notice and send out postcards. So you will, and we'll be on the website, and also if you're on our email list, it will go out to you through that means as well.
And there were 3 hands back there.
How many people do you have to have for a quorum?
We have to have 4 voting members.
4 voting members?
Yes, 4 people up here who have the ability to vote, and who, don't have to recuse themselves for one reason or another.
We don't think, sorry, no. If you have any questions after our hearing, you can talk to our staff. Thank you. Okay, good job. Okay, well, please let us finish our meeting, and if you have questions, go to the staff. Okay, we don't have any new business. We just have authorizations. We have this one, and then there's one authorization for 5.
Make a motion, we approve the authorization for next time.
I second.
Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.